First of all, a lot of you may or may not be aware of the fact that we have a number of club members that go out and do really cool things that extend into the world of ham radio way beyond just the Vienna Wireless Society. One of those folks who's done some really interesting things in the last couple of years is Bill Mims, our speaker tonight, W2WCM. Last year, a lot of you were lucky enough to hear Bill talk about his DXpedition to Cuba. Well, this year, Bill was involved in another great activity. He was DXing with a group that was over in the Faroe Islands. Yeah, it was a very exciting time. Some of us were fortunate enough to work Bill during that activity. And so let's hear a little bit more about it now. So, Bill, over to you.
Well, thanks, and applause. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to talk to all of you. This is one heck of a club. I'm hoping to give you the feel for what it was like to be on this DXpedition. There's no way I can put you in a position to know what it's really like to be in the Faroe Islands. I would encourage everybody, if you get a chance, to go there. And if you get a chance to go on a DXpedition, take it. So, this past June, we were in the Faroe Islands as a DXpedition to OY land. This is our logo, and I want to point out just a couple things. First of all, the bird in the upper left-hand corner is a puffin. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a waterfall. More about those later. So this is a question that I got asked a lot. Some of you raised your hand and you said you knew where it was because I told you. But anyhow, so where the heck are they? Well, there. In the middle of the North Atlantic, between Norwegian Sea and the North Atlantic, they're about 200 miles north of the Shetlands and about 400 miles from Reykjavik in Iceland. And as you can see, they're about the same latitude as Anchorage, Alaska. If you look on the globe, you can see that. So they're sort of out there in the middle of nowhere. Volcanic islands that have been around for a long time. There are 18 islands, 17 of which are inhabited. This little guy right here is not inhabited normally, but some of those islands are only inhabited by a few people. In fact, at the end of the presentation tonight, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Skúvoy, the one down there, sort of in the middle of the bottom. It only has 15 people that live there. So here's a little bit about the Faroese people, because I was fascinated by the whole culture, the whole experience of being in the Faroes and the Faroese people, especially the ones that we work closely with, and I'll tell you about them in a minute. So here's a little bit about the Faroese people. As you can imagine, the capital, Torshavn, that's the way they say it, by the way, Torshavn, is the biggest city, is about 14,000 people. Most of them speak 3 languages. In fact, as far as I can tell, all 3 of them did. Let me tell you quickly about this. Of course, they all start off as children with Faroese, which is a language that is related distantly to Icelandic. It's part of the Old Norse language because the Vikings were there in the year 1815 or something like that, and they stayed behind. They left behind the language, and a few of them stayed there, and that's the population, the ancestors of the population today. So they all speak 3 languages. They speak Faroese. They're part of the Kingdom of Denmark. So early in their elementary education, they learn Danish because they're part of Denmark, and shortly after that, they start to learn English, because they need to have a way to communicate and be part of the world, so they chose English. Lucky for us. By the way, as I'll be able to show you, I hope, they speak English colloquially American. It's not British. They sound like you guys. It's just freaking amazing. And I'll take one more minute here to say that we went to restaurants, we visited stores, we were engaged in meeting the Faroese people, and I never once ran across a person that didn't speak perfect English. And that's their 3rd language. Remember that. That's their 3rd language. So they are well educated. They all seem to know a lot about the world. In fact, I would say, sadly perhaps, that they are more aware of what's going on in the world than many people in this country are. So got to throw something like this in here, right? I mean, these are beautiful Faroese women, but the reason this is up there is to show you a little bit about their traditional dress. Sure, yeah. Here's a little bit about their economy. Oops, let me go back. Not surprisingly, fish is a big part of their economy in terms of exports and wool, because there are more sheep than people. and they import a lot of energy. Now, this is an interesting picture because this is standard throughout the islands. They catch a lot of fish, haddock, cod, whatever, and they typically dry it before they eat it. They call it fermenting, but for us, it's just air drying. But that's fermented fish. They also have a lot of buildings that are specifically built for this. They have wooden buildings with slats, so they keep out the animals, but let the air blow through. There are lots of windy days there in the Faroe Islands. So let me tell you a little bit about the Faroese language because I was fascinated by it. As I said, it was a leftover from the Old Norse days, and it was the language that was carried forward by a couple of things. One of them is the rural people. It was their local colloquial language, but also it was the language that was carried forward because it carried the traditions of the people, the history of the Faroe Islands and the history of the Faroese people. But there was no written language until the middle of the 1800s when one of their number, who was a linguist, decided they ought to have a written language, and he did it. By the way, they say, and I couldn't tell you this, but they say that the written language has nothing to do with the way they pronounce things. They even have letters that are not pronounced, kind of like Russian. So it's kept alive, as I said, for hundreds of years through the Faroese chain dance. They do this chain dance as part of their culture. That it's a part of the big celebrations in the middle of winter where they only get about 4.5 hours of daylight. And what it is a dance in a circle. Everybody faces the center of the circle, and they take one step to the right and then two steps to the left. One step to the right, two steps to the left. And there are 7,000 verses or something like that of this songs that they sing. And there's a chorus. Everybody knows the chorus, and somebody knows one or at least of all 7,000 verses. So it can go on all night. So now I'm going to organize this by just showing you what captivated me, which was the Faroese people, the island, and the scenery. I could spend 2 hours here just showing you photos of scenery because it's all incredible. But let me just give you a little bit of idea, and then we'll talk a little bit about radio. So, volcanic islands. This is basalt. They are millions of years old, and there's no longer an active volcano anywhere around. But the storms of the North Atlantic can be pretty fierce up there, and especially in the wintertime. And so the northwest side of most of the islands has a sheer cliff to it, like those. On the eastern side, they get a lot of rain. It rains 300 days a year. When we were there, we only had 1 day without rain, and even that day it kind of sprinkled. We were there for 10 or 11 days. And so the eastern side gets enough water, and they've, over the years, has developed enough topsoil, so it's very green. So you'll see a lot of greenery here. In fact, that's what they use for roofs on a lot of their buildings. That's a church in a village. That church is 200 years old and still active. Most of the villages have a church, and a lot of them look like that. This is just an impressive scene, driving along the coast somewhere in a little village in the distance, probably only has 30, 40 occupants. Anybody want to go soda? I mean, to me, that was incredibly impressive. That's very stark. Now, the other side of it, you can imagine what it looks like. It's a sheer cliff. Wow. So let's see here. Water everywhere because, as I said, it rains a lot. So there are waterfalls. Some of them are more impressive than others. I'm going to show you that one that's on the logo in a minute. But these kind of waterfalls are everywhere, sometimes right through the middle of villages. By the way, that's the Faroese flag up in the corner in case nobody got that. I call this town the beach because there's sort of almost a black sand beach down there in the corner. And believe it or not, they think summer is here when the temperature gets to be about 55 or 60. So they go swimming and beaching. All right, here's our motley crew. There was one guy there that had no idea what he was doing. I don't know if you can pick him out, but he's the guy in the orange hat. And And Krish is the guy that makes bunny ears over Jim, who is our leader, one of our leaders. And that's just a stark picture of a stark background with us just standing there so we could get in the scenery. More about us later. Now, here's an interesting picture. This is the Faroese prison. Now, there's very low crime in the Faroese Islands. They are an egalitarian society. There's almost no one that's morbidly rich and almost no one that's desperately poor. And that cuts down the crime rate all by itself. Plus, they have everybody knows everybody. 55,000 people, they probably all know each other. And as a result, they have a very low crime rate. If someone does commit a crime that requires them to be incarcerated, they go here. I don't think there was anybody in there when we were there, but believe it or not, there's a miniature golf course in there. Yeah. If you commit a crime that's very serious, however, they send you to Denmark, and you don't want that. So the view that's the view from the prison. So if you got to be in prison, go to the Faroe Islands. Now this is a scene in a town at the north of the second big island. The biggest island is called Strimoy. This is Eysturoy. By the way, they call Strimoy the mainland. So this is the other mainland. This village is called Gulagab. That's close to the way they pronounce it, but not right. But it's the translates as gorge. Now, I want to tell you something about this hill here. That hill is probably, I don't know, several hundred feet high at its peak. That hill has the pathway for mail delivery for over 100 years. So the mail came from the other side of that hill, village on the coast. The mailman came over the hill 3 days a week, brought all the mail, and then picked up the mail and walked back up over the hill to deliver it. Now, that's a postal worker, but that's the way things work in the Faroe Islands. Now, this little village is famous because it's, I don't know, it's like 400 or 500 years old, and it's called a gorge because of this. That's a natural gorge that I was standing. If I turned around from the picture that I took before, look, that's what I was looking at. And what that is a natural gorge that was perfect for fishing because they could bring their fishing catch in there, unload it, and bring it up on these rails here into town where it was processed, fermented, packaged, and shipped. Now, there's a lot of wildlife. I'm just going to concentrate on one. There's a lot of seabirds, skuas, gulls, all kinds of seabirds. But this is the one that's probably the most famous, the puffin. There are puffins throughout the Arctic area, I think both in the northern Arctic and the Antarctic, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, there are a lot of them there in the Faroe Islands. They're cute little critters. They're kind of amazing because when they fly, they flap their wings like crazy. And the Faroese say they're terrible flyers, but they're very good swimmers because they get their food by diving into the ocean. And they say they're capable of diving down as low as 100 meters to get food. Anybody here who got the QSL card or who wants a QSL card, by the way, let me know if you work this. I'll get you one. But if you get the QSL card and look on the front, you'll see a picture of a puffin with a bunch of fish in his beak that he just dove to get. So they're great swimmers, not so good flyers, and they gather in huge flocks. But unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that. Now here's that waterfall that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the logo. Guess $1, something like that. And it's famous because it's probably the most stark waterfall. But look at the way the clouds are surrounding that mountain there. And if you haven't had a close look at the picture that's on this logo. You can check it out later on my back or whatever. This just shows you the weather changes there every 5, 10, 15 minutes. And those clouds are moving through there very rapidly. Now I'm going to try to show you a video. Let me show you that again because I want you to notice that the rain is blowing horizontally in front of the camera. And if you'll notice, there's blue sky in the distance there. So, in 5 minutes from when I took this video, there might be sunshine, but 5 minutes later, it'll be gray and rainy again. By the way, we were there in June. In June, the sun never quite sets. It gets to be dusk for 3 hours from about midnight to about 2 or 3 in the morning, but it's still very light. I know this because I was up. I'm an old man, had to make a trip. All right, this is actually a picture taken by one of our hosts that you're going to meet here in just a minute. He is a professional photographer and has a drone. So this is a drone's eye view of the capital, Torshavn. Now, I want to point out one thing here. This little area right here is called Tiganes. That's where the first buildings were when the Vikings landed in the year 800 and something. And in fact, the very first parliament in the world was held right there on Tiganes in the 9th century. I'm not sure exactly the date. You'll see the current parliament in a minute. But I want to also point out that there's a huge structured harbor there, and that's because they depend enormously on trade, as you can imagine. They're out there in the middle of nowhere, and shipping is huge for them. There's a ferry right there. They have ferries that leave, almost on the hour, that go to other islands, also go to Iceland and to Denmark. Probably makes sense. I thought this was a great photo because it reminded me of Bergen, Norway. Lots of boats, beautiful colored buildings in the background. Some of those are shops, some are restaurants. Now, this is a picture I took standing in the main. This is the main drag through Tiganes that I told you about. That building on the right is the office of the Prime Minister. On the left is the Treasury, and the one that's right next to me that you can hardly see is the Foreign Affairs Office. So they have autonomy from Denmark in many areas. They depend upon Denmark for security and for the military. They don't have their own military. The Danish take care of that for them. But these buildings obviously are not 9th century buildings. They're much more modern than that. But I thought it was fascinating that they have a government that fits on that little peninsula, and we take the whole of Washington, D.C. and places all over the country to replicate what they've done in one little peninsula there. Speaking of Parliament, now I can't pronounce that. I think they say Løting, but it means the law thing. That is the Parliament building. I think there are 30 some odd members of Parliament. I wish I could look in the window, and I kind of wish I'd taken a picture. I can't go in there because they were not in session, but it's very orderly, very simple, and it makes a lot of sense to see the inside of that Parliament building. And they get a lot done there, I can imagine. You can imagine if you have 30 members of Parliament as opposed to 538 members of Congress, you can get a lot done. And right where I was, this whole area here in front is the Parliament Square, which is where that chain dance was taking place. And if you turn around from where I'm standing when I took that picture, you see this. And I find that fascinating. First of all, the sod roof is just cool as heck. But that's the old bookstore. Now, that bookstore is special because it has a huge collection of books, some in Faroese, some in Danish, and believe it or not, a huge collection of books in English. Remember, the third language. And it has a art supply store that's complete. It has a coffee shop, a pastry shop, cake shop, places to play games. All that's in that one building there. And right off to the left of that picture, you see this. So we'll talk about that in a minute, propagation. But before we do, a couple more things about the Faroes. First of all, they have built 4 large subsea tunnels because remember, 18 islands. And before they had any of those subsea tunnels to get from one island to another, you had to take a ferry. So that's the entrance to the tunnel that goes from Strömøy to Eysturoy. You mean from the mainland to the other big island? That one is specifically, curious is not the right word. It's kind of special because it literally has an underground roundabout. You go about 2/3 along the way in the tunnel, and you get to a spot where it splits and goes off to 2 different locations on the other island. And they built a roundabout underneath there. And in fact, there's a replication of the chain dance right there. Okay, so let's talk radio. And here's a picture of the 2 guys There were our co-leaders. Jim Milner, WB2REM, is up in the upper left. Some of you may know him. He's been a ham radio for 150 years or more. And Mike, W9MK from Joliet, Illinois, was the other leader, the co-leader. We divided the group into teams. I'll talk about that in a minute. I was part of Mike's team. And here's what we think it takes to make a DXpedition. I want to digress here for a moment and say this is a comfortable DXpedition to a place where you can get to fairly easily, that has buildings and food and facilities and other hams. This is not Bouvet. In my view, there are three types of DXpeditions. There are the big ones. It's Bouvet and Swains Island, where there's nobody there. You got to take everything with you, and you got to leave nothing behind. And the whole thing has to be funded. By the way, the next Bouvet DXpedition, I think it's 3 Yankee 0 kilo, but I may be wrong. Anyhow, it's now up to about $1 million that they're going to have to spend. Well, there you go. Late news, folks. Breaking news: 1.7 million. So that's a big DXpedition. Then we have the medium DXpeditions where you can get there, but there's not much there. And you have to take a lot of stuff with you, your food, whatever. That's a medium DXpedition. Then we have the nice DXpeditions, and that's where I go. So the first DXpedition I went on was to the Galapagos, and at least that one thing about the Galapagos is there are no other hams there. If you're a ham, if you talk to somebody, work the Galapagos, you work somebody that went there. Here, there are hams, and we'll see them, meet a couple of them in a minute. Anyhow, here's what it takes. These things, not necessarily in any order, but these are the things we had to go through. Our planning started a year ahead of time. It was funded by ourselves. We had to carry some radios and antennas with us. The publicity was handled by Jim, and we were actually in WQST radio, QST magazine, and we were in Bernie's Daily DX. Transportation we had to arrange because we came from all over the U.S. One member of the troop came from New Mexico. There was one from Joliet, Illinois, 2 from South Florida, 1 from North Carolina, 1 from Maryland, and me from Virginia. So that gives you a feel for that. Why the Faroes? Well, here's why. So that's why we chose to go there. Yeah, good choice. We chose the Faroes because it was somewhat isolated and rare. By the way, it's number 136 on the most wanted list for North America. It was easy to get to. I'll show you transportation in a minute. And there was the possibility of local hams to help. We had some contact with a local amateur radio club there beforehand. And the very first things we were told was, well, you can come and we may let you use our antennas, but nothing else, because the last bunch of guys that came here messed up our radios and we don't want anybody using that stuff anymore. Now, the good news is that our guys, our leadership, spoke to them over the course literally of a year and got to know them so well that everything changed. So here's the group. I can read them all, but we were in 2 teams. There was the WB2REM team and the W9MK team. I was on that team. So our goals were a little different for those 2. We wanted to experience the Faroes and learn a little bit about them, operate 3 stations, maybe even more. And we specifically picked the timing so we could participate in the ARRL International digital contest. And of course, we wanted to have fun. How do we get there? Well, we went through Iceland and we spent 2 days there. That could be the subject of a whole nother presentation. So I'm not talking about Iceland, except for Iceland Air. This was the plane that took us from Reykjavik to the Faroes, and you get a good view of the weather there. I can't help myself, I'll tell you. I used to fly those. So here's that map again, and I pointed out because it's sort of a nice view of the islands, and here's a better one because it talks about, it shows you where Torshavn is right here, and you can almost see them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 subsea tunnels, each one of which costs $1 billion or so to build because they have great environment and they don't want to mess it up. Okay, here's the space view of the central part of the capital, Torshavn. Remember, it's only like 12, 14,000 people. And here is a space view of the radio club. The Faroese Amateur Radio Club is in this shack right here. You can see how close it is to the water, salt water. Not a bad idea. As you can see, it was established. They heard about this new club in Vienna, Virginia, called the Vienna Wireless Society, and they decided to replicate it. So 2 years later, they established this club. Now, that's the club, and you can see the towers. There are actually 4 there. There's a short one here and the big one behind it. That's the one that has the optibeam on it. To show you how nicely our leadership made nice with them, that optibeam is on top of that tower. They had owned for 2 years, and it was still in the box. When they knew that we were coming, when we confirmed everything, they knew we were coming, they said, you know what, we need to put that optibeam up. So they put that optibeam up for us, in a sense. And it turned out to be a wonderful thing. So they have all those antennas, and they have a couple that we could not use. This is a 6 meter and a 4 meter. As you know, we don't have any privileges on 4 meters in this country. That's another one of Olivar's drone shots. Get a good view of that nice optibeam there. Pointed more or less toward North America in that photo. Another sunny day. They happen every summer. They have a sunny day. Now here's the 2 guys that I want to talk a minute about. The guy on the right is Oscar Yankee 1, Oscar Foxtrot, Oliver Fredrickson. The guy, he's the president of the club. The vice president on the left is Rayan, and I can't pronounce his last name, so we call him Reggie, and he was fine with that. Oscar Yankee 1 Romeo. Now, he's a ship captain. Looks like a young guy to me to be a ship captain. You know, he captains ferries and fishing vessels in the islands. Olivar used to be an electrical engineer working in communications on oil rigs off the coast of Norway. Yes, he speaks Norwegian too. And he finally developed a photography business, and he's now just a full-time professional photographer. He is the town or the city of Torshavn's official photographer. This room is just one of the rooms in that shack. This is their big radio room. And they let us use some of those radios because we were nice guys. This is their gathering room. So, message to the club leadership.
White leather couches, please.
So there we were. We spent a lot of time there just talking to them, learning about the Faroes, learning about radio. Again, they're both very good amateur radio operators with a lot of knowledge. They're much smarter than I am. And remember, English is their 3rd language. So we spent a lot of time there. They make great coffee. We had snacks. There's a little where I'm standing when I took that photo it's just in front of a little kitchen they have there. So when they have their club meetings, they don't have to bring food in. They just prepare it right there.
How many people in the club?
Good question. And we were told, well, there's about 30, but only about 7 that actually come to the meetings, and there's really only those 2 guys. However, we increased their population by 2 because I'm actually a member of the Faroese Amateur Radio Club. Now, I won't be going back, and the meetings are held in Faroese, or held in Faroese, but again, they all speak English. Now, this is Viva, the radio dog. I want you to hear what Reggie says to him. Sorry, it's Viva.
Boya. I didn't say go. I didn't say boya. You can't say anything, you know. If he hears any noise, he's gonna go for it. Boya. Boya. Boya.
What he does is he puts a little treat on his nose and releases him, and he grabs it. And what he's saying is, in literally colloquial American English, he said, no, don't do that. You can't say anything. You can't say anything. If he hears even the slightest thing, he'll go for it now. And then he says stay in Faroese. I learned that word. It's boya. So all you people, boya. Boya. There you go. Right. Moving on. So this is the motley crew, including the two people from the Faroese radio club. There's Olivar there, Reggie over there. It's a little bit of a mashup of a picture, but if I don't point that out to you, you won't notice it. And we're standing, oh, by the way, that's the kitchen back there in the club. Here I am all bundled up because it was 50 degrees outside. If you talk to me on sideband, either 20 or 40 meters, that's where I was sitting. If you didn't talk to me, then that's still where I was sitting. And then most of you talked from the club, talked to this guy, Mike. Mike was the co-leader again. He was the leader of my group. And the radios that you see there are the ones that we took with us. So that computer, that Yaesu, and that I think it's an expert linear there, were things that we took with us. We left them to Yaesu because they wanted a radio like that, and we felt like it was something we could do for them. This is WB2REM. Does anyone here know him met him personally? You do. He's a character in many ways, and as you can see, he looks like he's really focused. But what's really going on is he's doing his email on his phone while he's working sideband in a pileup. Okay, so we were trying to put stations at not only at the club, but at each of our residence locations. This is ours. It's in the center of the old part of Torshavn. Nice place, small, fairly old, but comfortable enough. There's a couple of problems, though. One of them is the owners live right behind there in that tree. Secondly, the metal roof. Thirdly, there's a metal roof. There's a hill. That way is North America. So the takeoff for us to North America was not good. Secondly, there's trees, but what do you do about antennas? We couldn't find a way to put up an antenna in any of those trees. So we ended up doing this. That's a Wolf River Coils 20-meter vertical with as many radios as we could find in a gravel yard between the two houses. Now we had to take off toward Europe, so we did work a lot of Europe, mostly FT8, from this location. That's my 7300 and computer there, and you can see the secondary club lounge in the background there. This is the location of the other team, the WB2REM team. Now, there's a story here, and I'll make it very brief. They had a place to stay through Airbnb downtown Torshavn, up on the top of a building. There's not many tall buildings. They were going to be in a penthouse apartment with a balcony, and they were planning all kinds of great takeoffs and stuff like that. That fell through at the last minute. They had to scramble, and they found this place about 2 kilometers outside of town, this white building here. And you can see the vertical that they have. Guess which way North America is here? It's that way. So they put that up, and they put up an in-fed half wave. That's them putting that up. That's actually Krish, I think. Note the weather. And they had plenty of room to do all this as long as they didn't get in trouble with the sheep. And there's Krish, Krish is sort of like the WA8A8Z of our group. He's an Energizer bunny. He never stops. I don't even think he slept the whole time we were there. And he's actually, in this case, he'd actually set up 2 radios. So he's working 2 antennas, 2 different bands as OY stroke K4LT. Some of you may have worked that station. Okay, what about this propagation thing that I was trying to figure out? That's our problem. So the sun was being bad, behaving very badly just before we got there, and it stayed that way for almost the first week. And it didn't get a lot better for the weekend of the contests. But there we are, all of a sudden ready to go. So what do you do? Well, first of all, let's point to this is the VOA-CAP chart for the 6th of June. The contest was on the 7th and 8th. But you can see that there's no propagation on the higher bands, almost none on the lowers. We did have 40 meters and we did have 20 meters and 30 meters. We didn't have 60. We didn't have an antenna for 30, and we didn't have an antenna for 60. So there you go. That's what we were stuck with. What's the DXpedition to do? Well, if you call CQ from OY land, you get an instant pileup. They say it's like getting 3 dB for free. Maybe even more than that. Yeah, maybe what's an S unit? 6 dB. Yeah. So we found this out. What were the results? Well, again, there's a picture of the club up there with all those beautiful antennas. Here's what we found. We were first in the ARRL Digi contest in the Faroes. We did contact 99 countries, just missed DXEC. We estimate, I don't have the actual firm numbers, but we estimate that of those 15,000 approximately QSOs, that about a third of them were unique call signs, a little over half were FT8 or FT4, and the rest, of course, were sideband and CW. Almost all were on either 40 or 20 meters. So I can't end this without talking a little bit more about the Faroes. So this is we had an invitation for Olivar to go out to his summer home. So he's doing very well as a photographer because he's got a place on the island of Skúvoy over here. So we took the subsea tunnel from the big island, the mainland, to here, Sandoy. Then we take a ferry from here to there. This is what the ferry looks like. It runs on demand. And this is actually on the way back on the ferry. This is Olivar. As you can see, he's a serious photographer. He's got 3 cameras there. He's got the phone. He's got what I would call a big camera. And then he's got what I would call the OptiBeam lens on. Yeah. That island in the background is Skúvoy. And you can see this is the eastern edge. See how it slopes down? Because on the other side, it's a sheer cliff. This is his summer home. In the upper left, you see the original road down to the harbor. That's his little cottage. This is the view of the dining area. Now, you could really get away from it all here, except for one thing. A few years ago, Huawei came to the Faroes and said, you know, we want to try something out here. We're willing to, for free, put in a system that will guarantee full cell phone coverage throughout the islands. Remember, there are 18 islands here, some of which have you've seen some mountains, right? How do you do that? Well, I don't know, but they did it because I had 5 bars right there at that house.
What was the grid like?
The grid? You mean the electrical grid? Good question. As far as I could tell, in the city of Torshavn, it was all underground and it worked beautifully. And of course, it's European current. It's 50 hertz and 240 volts, right? I don't know if that's what you meant, but. All right, so how did we do? I don't know if you can read that or not, but that's sort of what I did for this presentation. The cartoon over there on the left says, in setting the sales goal after the sales, we were able to consistently maintain an above average sales quota. So success. All right, I want to say well, first of all, let's talk about our takeaways. This is what these guys say to us. 3 dB for free, fermented fish, and unlimited pileups. And I will say this, in all seriousness, I've been on DXpeditions before, working pileups. I've worked pileups on K2B and other stations here in the U.S., some of our special events for the club. I have never seen pileups like this. This was the most challenging pileups that I've encountered. It really took a lot of work. I think if I were a couple more years older, I wouldn't have been able to do it because it required an enormous amount of concentration to pull call signs out. But that's what they think. 3 dB for free, fermented fish, and unlimited pileups in the Faroe Islands. So Special thanks to Wolf River Coils, to our own WA6YOU, who provided a cabling that we needed desperately, and I left it behind, Ron. They were very grateful to get it, so thank you for that. Thank you to the Faroese Amateur Radio Club, Takfiri, which is Faroese for thank you very much. Thank you enormously for allowing me to do this. It's really an honor and privilege to speak about anything I do to the Dayton Hamvention Club of the Year 2021.
Bill, thank you so very, very much. Round of applause.